Um, Welcome to another episode of Azania in Therapy. I'm your host, Tlaka. Today, my guest is a clinical social worker and therapist, lecturer. She also works with clients from different walks of life, dealing with psychological issues affecting their mental health. She works from a solution focused approach and a narrative therapy approach. Please welcome my guest today, Sinenhlanhla Nyoni. How are you?
Hi, Thabang. Thanks for having me. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm just happy, glad to be talking to you today. I've been following your socials, beautiful energy. I'm also into camera work and I'm into design, how things feel. I must say, when I visit your socials, they feel very serene, very therapeutic. Which says a lot about you. Would you agree?
Thank you. I love that description. Thank you. I think that's the calm I'm trying to present,
Yeah.
to potential clients and people who are just, engaging with my page on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Just an informative space to bring about more information and knowledge, around mental health, psychosocial issues that, impact people on a day-to-day basis and the importance of therapy as well. So I love that you describe it as, serene and calm, because that's exactly what the point I'm going with.
No, it's doing its job, and I thought to give you feedback because that's actually I'm big on that. When you meet people, one of the first things you pick up is their energy. So I that's partly actually why I wanted to talk to you. It was just when I looked at it and how it made me feel, I thought definitely talk to you. Now, so you're a clinical social worker. For those who don't know, what it is, because part of why I do this, show, is to just educate people about, the various mental health professionals, and for in layman's terms, what's a clinical social worker?
So, a clinical social worker is somebody who's completed their master's program. So, beyond the undergrad social work degree, you'll then go on to do your 2 years in clinical social work. And essentially, what that is, it's an advanced level of social work where you are able to work with clients in terms of assessing mental health disorders or mental health issues, intervening, and to some degree also diagnosing. So it also engages in a therapeutic sense, on a psychological or psychosocial therapeutic sense as well. But I think the most important thing with clinical social work is really just the ability to work with a person within the environment, because it's not just the psychology or the in-depth, internal stuff that happens to somebody. It's also the environmental factors that look at, somebody and how they're affected. So a clinical social worker is really somebody who works with, mental health issues.
Thank you very much. I think that's a wonderful way of putting it. The other thing you are doing is you are lecturing, and just a little bit about, what are you lecturing? What are you enjoying? The theme subjects that you're currently dealing with?
Cool. So I've been in the lecturing world or in academia now for about a year. And it's really just been an exciting time because I've gotten to work with a lot of young people in the social work undergrad space. I lecture the social work with children and families module at a third year level, which is quite exciting because I think, given our context and in South Africa, some of the vulnerable people specifically are children, and they exist within families. So it's really that kind of module that really starts to look at, sort of like the dimensions within which children exist in and the families and the dynamics that come with that. Then I also facilitate second year internship courses and modules. I'm at the University of Johannesburg, by the way. So it's just an exciting space to really get to understand in depth from an academic space the issues that really people grapple with on a day-to-day basis, but also just grooming the upcoming, professionals in social work.
Thank you very much. I mean, the for talking to you. I mean, the reason I wanted to talk to you, one of the interesting topics is where we are right now. at the beginning of the year, people are, experiencing a lot. People joke a lot about January. It's this month where
Yeah.
people are going to struggle, but there are other things that are going on. In your perspective, what are you noticing that people are currently struggling with?
Yeah, so it's like you say, it is a lot. And I think people really, because of how dynamic we are, we tend to obviously grapple with different, issues in our lives, depending on where we are,
Yeah,
the trajectory of our life and, the transition that we're going through. But currently, I think in my practice, I'm seeing a lot of people firstly dealing with systemic issues. I think there's no way you cannot be affected by things like unemployment, things like load shedding, and how it's affecting businesses, particularly if you're an entrepreneur and you're striving to bring in some kind of income. So systemic issues, gender-based issues, domestic violence. So those exist on a like larger spectrum, and so people are tending to be affected by that specifically. And then if you zone it in slightly on a much more intimate space, I'm also seeing a lot of like relational issues as well, right? So whether it's marital issues, couples issues, or relational issues related to, work related conflicts or manager, supervisor, subordinate kind of issues. So people are really struggling from that, perspective, because again, we are dynamic individuals. We come into spaces, into partnerships, into work as ourselves. And it's hard to be in relation with somebody and not find conflict. So there's a lot of that going on at the moment as well, where people are really trying to pull in organic resources, where you focus on conflict resolution, communication. How do we then, figure out, what the problem is and how do we work around it and how do we get to a point where we know how to deal with this and how to manage it, right? And then also beyond just, the systemic and the relational, there's also in-depth internal stuff that's happening,
yeah,
internally. And I'm sure you're aware of this as a psychologist as well.
yeah,
It's not just the environment that affects you,
yeah,
it's also internal stuff, right? So
yeah.
like, from an emotional perspective, people are really just stressed. I think
Mm,
living in such busy times that it's hard for you not to be affected by what's going on. So from an internal point of view, you're seeing people stressed, you're seeing people's routines shifted a lot with obviously us coming from the pandemic and people still struggling with working from home or people having to go back into the office. So there's been some kind of shift in that, and so people are stressed. People are really just struggling with mental health, issues around anxiety, depression, low mood. I don't know what's wrong with my mood, but I'm just not feeling myself. You having these experiences where you don't know how to articulate or express what you're going through. And you tend to see this in how people start to struggle with things like sleeping, or your exercise or your eating, for instance, right? So it starts to manifest in ways that you're identifying that there's a change in me. Maybe I've gained weight, I'm stress eating, or my anxiety is not allowing me to really just put a healthy plate of food, for myself to really like nourish my body. So it's all those things, and I think it's nice that if we can look at it from those three dimensions, from an
yeah.
individual perspective, from a relational perspective, and from a systemic or environmental perspective.
Yeah, I think well put, yeah, that, the micro, the macro, the micro, and internally what's going on. And maybe let's start with where you started with, just in terms from a systemic perspective, right? I think a lot of people, we underestimate, for example, so you mentioned load shedding. People underestimate, the toll it takes on one when you can't run your business, when you are getting retrenched, when you can't put food on the table. Now schools are opening, you have to buy uniform and things like that. Maybe to say a little bit more about that, regarding how to help people understand the link between,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing okay financially, and now, and I don't even understand how I'm feeling, to help people understand how, when you're not doing well, when the economy is the way it is, how that can impact on a person, because sometimes we underestimate how things like that can affect us.
For sure, 100%. I think it's hard to put into words if you really maybe don't have the language for it, right?
Yeah.
You know, things like, not having a stable income is affecting you because you can't put a plate on the table or you can't buy stationery for your child. We know that that affects us, but we don't tend to understand the in-depth, stuff that it does to us, from a mental health perspective. So if you picture like load shedding, you wake up in the morning, you're being load shed, and you can't obviously iron your outfit for the day to go to work. And perhaps maybe, it's still in the dark and you're trying to get dressed and all of that stuff. Already you're starting your day off in a very like highly sprung space where you aren't able to really just ground yourself as you wake up in the morning. And you can imagine if that's the tone of your morning, how then the rest of your day unfolds, right? It's going to be difficult for you to just get into work because there's traffic, right? And also traffic just really heightens your anxiety levels. It gets you like thinking about, oh my gosh, am I going to be late? Am I going to make it for that meeting? Already you're so uncontained and so, and feeling so unsettled with yourself. By the time you get into the office, you're trying to have your first cup of tea, and there's load shedding again, right?
Yeah.
And so that on a day-to-day basis, that prolonged experience or exposure to stressful events that aren't allowing you to, bounce back or to decompress or to contain yourself, that prolonged exposure to those kinds of things starts to
Yeah.
really impact on your well-being, on your overall well-being. And then you think about it, I come back from work after a long day, there's also load shedding. So it's like you really are struggling to find a space in your life where you can really just decompress. Because the thing about burnout, right, so if I come into like an example like burnout, right, it's prolonged exposure to stressful events where you're not taking time out to then decompress, or you're not taking time out to really just find yourself and breathe and be mindful and all of those things. So you're consistently like being bombarded by these events that aren't allowing you for all of that stuff. So at some point you then reach burnout, but then again, because of our everyday experiences and everyday people, you and I are professionals in the mental health space, but everyday people, I can imagine that they really struggle to articulate or to understand the link between everyday like social or societal issues and how they impact their well-being, their overall well-being.
Yeah, I mean, you put it beautifully. How the day starts, and it's just flowing into, it's the one thing into the other, into the next. And I think it's that underestimation of how these little things affect us. How you describe it. You begin your day, you're highly sprung, and then of course your brain and your body is producing all these chemicals that are also affecting you, and you don't even catch a break. And so that impacts us. So the other thing that you mentioned in terms of how things flow, maybe a little bit about from the systemic perspective, GBV, right? I'm just imagining, here you are, you are stressed. Your psychological resources, emotional resources, financial resources. Here you are in the house, these two stressed out people, and then they have to deal with each other. I don't know if that also comes up in your sessions, or what you observe, that people, when things are not going well, say financially or with the economy, now these like the stress levels start increasing now interpersonally.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, think about it. If in couples, it always plays out that way. I mean, let's maybe put domestic violence aside, but then
Yeah, just yeah.
just from a relational perspective, imagine, I used to make this joke during, lockdown, where both couples are working from home, and there's no time to really just step away from your couple, because some of the things that really bring you back together as couples is being able to be individuals. Step away, go to work, come back, and then you reconnect. So now in lockdown, all of that is stripped away. You guys are 24/7 in each other's faces, of course there will be tension, because
Mm,
wherever two people meet, there
mm,
is bound to be conflict, and there's bound to be breakdown of some sort, right? So communication issues as well. So I think just looking at couples and relationships, there's a lot that can be said about why we're dealing with the issues that we're facing now. Things like
mm,
your personal issues, your upbringing as a child, your traumas in childhood as well.
mm,
And
mm,
essentially then we choose to come together as a couple, but then there are things that we need to work towards. So a lot of things I think I see in my sessions with couples is really communication issues, where we aren't communicating at the same level. One of us is maybe perhaps stonewalling. I'm not wanting to communicate. I'm withdrawn. Whenever there's a fight, I don't want to engage. And it almost seems like, somebody's emotionally unavailable. And then maybe the other party or the other partner is really trying to lean in, or is trying to have, conversations. So it's a communication issue, but then just, conflict styles, how do we fight? Do we fight fair? Because then there's some couples who are like, it's wrong for us to be fighting. Why are we fighting? But then fights are healthy,
yes.
right? They're
Mm,
very healthy, and it's okay to fight, but then you just need to be aware of your fighting style and
mm,
what you do to then bounce back from the fight, or to bounce forward rather. So
mm.
there's many nuanced things, in relationships, and that
Yeah.
that that you tend to come up.
Yeah, and taking it to relationships. Now we're talking with romantic relationships, but the other relationship that you brought up that people are often challenged with, is, say, maybe there are managers, issues at work, colleagues, and I don't know, any thoughts on that? How people are sort of navigating their space around work and other people in general with where we are currently.
Yeah, so I think it tends to be different. So maybe if I start like looking maybe at the corporate, environment
Yeah.
initially, I think there's obviously always levels. There's managers or team leaders, and then there's subordinates and all of that kind of stuff. There's always going to be, dynamic individuals in the workspace, particularly if you are like in a very fast-paced, corporate environment where expectations are high, delivery is expected of you. You need to be meeting your targets and your goals and all of that stuff. That tends to bring about also, conflictual or tension issues. But then again, given our history as South Africa, where we come from, apartheid as well. So it's those things that somewhat still play out in the work environment. I don't think it's spoken about, on large platforms a lot. But I also just think in the day-to-day environment, in the workspace, it's not also spoken about. So you find instances where I'll see clients who struggle with, their manager, and their manager is a white male and she's a black female, for instance, and she feels sidelined, or she will feel like she's not being seen or being heard, or she's being treated unfairly from maybe a gender perspective or a racial perspective. So conflicts like that or tensions like that tend to rise, or just social injustices like that tend to arise. But then also you find, ageism playing out in the workspace, where, a senior member who's slightly younger than the people they're managing,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
That brings in an interesting dynamic where, I'm trying to manage somebody who's older than me. I'm in a senior position, but then there's like that tension where somebody isn't sure of how to like respectfully, because culture also plays a significant role, right? Where you come into a workspace and you are taught that, you respect your elders. But what if my elders are somebody I'm managing and they're not performing, and now I have to have those difficult conversations with them?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
does that look like? How am I going to tell somebody who's my mom's age that, look, performance is a bit of an issue? How do we navigate that? So it's those kinds of like issues that you tend to see coming up in the workspace.
Yeah, I mean the first one you brought up about the workspace, I think we underestimated, as you say, because I too have come across situations where somebody will tell you, at work, that there are two kitchens, one kitchen for people who look like me, another kitchen
Yeah.
for people who look like someone else. And I would
Yeah.
think, yo, but we are in like 2023, and this stuff still happens. Or if people are working, say maybe in an accounting firm, there'd
Mm,
be, you go see those clients, and this
mm,
group of people
mm.
sees those clients, and then it would be it's put under the guise of, no, you're working with people you understand. But I think people, there's still a lot of racial issues that we struggle to sit together and work through, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of nuance. And as you say, I think we lack, I don't know if it's a lack of skills or vocabulary or the willingness to actually
Yeah.
engage with things like that. People do struggle with that. And you say, the ageism, that a lot. I also find it with men and women. I don't know if you say maybe in the mining space, where say you have an engineer, it's a young lady having to go tell male engineers, what to do, instruct them, or, and
Yeah.
they also experience some challenges. I don't know if that also, you've observed something like that as well.
So not directly in that perspective, but I am very much aware of colleagues who work, with that kind of stuff. But then the thing about that is it really stems from a very uncomfortable space. I think
Yeah.
as women, you are in a space where, it's predominantly a male environment, for instance, or it's predominantly not even just looking at gender, but just looking at, predominantly maybe white male dominated industry, and I'm a colored woman or I'm a black woman, that kind of stuff. So you tend to see those differences. But I think it stems from really just trust and respect, right? Because when we come into a workspace, we're coming in as individuals from our spaces and our context, and coming to share a working environment, and we've got goals, and we've got shared goals, and shared vision. But somewhere down the line, I think things like obviously attraction to, an opposite gender, or, a certain gender that you're interested in, those things do tend to happen again because we're human beings, right? But it also then depends on, the work policies, whether it allows for things like that to flourish and to happen, or there needs to be some certain like levels of boundaries. But then the thing about that also, the things that come into play are things like, well, if you do certain favors for me, then I might bump up salary, or I might put you in a different position or elevate your position. Those kind of things become a bit more like on the legal side of life. And so I think they need to be told very carefully, and you need to really just be, I mean, if you're going to have fun in the workspace, you can have fun, but I think you just need to be aware of your boundaries and the consequences, because all those kinds of like actions that do happen tend to come with consequences as well. That's something that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, boundaries, 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 right? But so one thing I'll ask you, if you're comfortable enough to respond to it, right? One of the things I'm usually curious about is women in the workplace, being, the relationships that come about. So sometimes those relationships are welcomed, and sometimes they are not. As a professional, where you work and with your clients in 2023, do you
Mm-hmm.
feel that being a woman negatively impacts you, or it works for you? Like, where you are, I'm just interested, as you, as a professional, how are you receiving, are you okay? Are you okay with your colleagues? Are you okay in your sessions? Are you good, or are you being harassed?
I think that just, I mean, let's leave work spaces out of it.
Yeah, just generally, yeah,
Just being a woman in 2023 in South Africa, Thabang,
yeah,
like I can't even begin to explain to you, right?
yeah.
We live in heightened fear. We are exposed to crime. We're exposed to so many different, elements that could potentially put our lives as women at risk, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
so that's just the beginning. That's the foundation, if we have to look at it that way. Then all of those things tend to play out in the, relationships we find ourselves in, whether it's in the workspace, whether it's in
mm,
sessions with a fellow male, a male client. For me, for instance, you're always on high alert as a woman.
mm,
I don't know if
mm,
I'm going into the space that you were looking to go into, but I think just as a woman in South Africa, you're always hyper vigilant. You're forced and you're brought into a space where you're forced to consistently be aware of your surroundings, be aware of, the people you come into contact with, be aware of the relationships you get into, right? So on a day-to-day basis, that forms your outlook in life, whether it's at work or whether it's at the gym, for instance, whether it's me in a session with a male client, maybe after hours, right? So it's those type of things really call for you to be cautious and to be aware consistently. I don't know if I'm answering you.
Yes, you are, because and the reason I ask you, because it's an important thing for me. I never thought about it up until I was just having a session, and then one lady many years ago said something like, when I walk in the street, and then when I walk in the street, she was just describing coming to the session, so she had to walk from one place to come to the session now. So this lady is explaining how many people greet her and talk to her, and then what kind of mindset she has to sort of attain before walking out of the house, coming to the session, right? So
Yeah,
she describes this to me, and for the first time, something clicked. I never thought about it that, because if I decided now to walk from here to go to a shop or whatever, I mean, nobody is going to greet me. I won't be
yeah,
forced to talk to anybody. You know what I mean? I'm going to go out and I'll come back. And I for the first time I appreciated the. I mean, if I had to walk, and the expectation was every person who greets me, I must respond to them. And if I don't respond to them, they insult me or they look at me funny. And then people who don't think that, but I greeted one person, now you're the fifth person, so I can't have my day like so then I thought, I think as a man, there are little things that we don't maybe understand, right? That
yeah,
maybe if you're at the gym, for example, and I'm
yeah,
approaching you. Maybe I'm the seventh person that day. And you just wanted to have a nice day. You were in your car this morning, somebody said hello to you, you were at the office, somebody was trying to talk to you, you were like,
yeah,
so it's like you don't have peace.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so I never thought of it that way, where you guys have to be aware of little things. If I had a session in the evening, the thing I'm afraid of is if somebody accused me of sexual harassment or something like that,
mm,
but I don't fear that somebody will hurt me physically. So
yeah,
I ask you because I think it's important to tease out, to flesh out for people who don't maybe are not aware that, hey, as a woman, this is actually what we do experience,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't think you could have a conversation with a woman in South Africa today who will not tell you that their personal bubble or their personal space tends
Yeah.
to not be respected, right? And
Mm-hmm.
each and every woman will give you an example or a scenario in their life that's happened. And, whoever you are and whatever sort of like class you are in as well as a woman, it's hard for you not to experience this. So I think for you as men, it's hard for you to even understand or to grasp it because it's not your everyday lived experience, right?
Yeah.
So things like this tend to happen on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes you're conscious to it, sometimes you're not even conscious to it. Or sometimes when you look back at your day at the end of the day and you're like, wait, actually, hang on, that was not
Mm-hmm.
okay. What happened to me there, that was not okay. But because there's so much of this hitting our faces on like minute by minute or hour by hour basis, you tend to not even pick it up at the moment when it happens. So a good example for me was I used to enjoy running, for my mental
Mm-hmm.
health and just being able to wake up in the morning, go out for a run. But during the time I was doing that, there was a lot of like videos like starting to trend about crime that was happening on the streets, people being joggers or runners being, targeted. And
Mm-hmm.
so essentially, I had to stop my running because of that. What I saw other women experiencing, not that I
Mm-hmm.
personally experienced it, but I saw that, and that could easily be me, right? I could easily be a
Mm-hmm.
target. But also the things like catcalling. So there was a construction site as well along my
Oh.
running route. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of like catcalling that happens, and it doesn't even matter. It's not even about what you wear, which tends to put people in a pickle where they think, but you're wearing this, which not doesn't even justify it, right? But it's one of those things where it doesn't even matter what you look like. As long as you're a woman in South Africa, you will be at, sadly, the mercy of, men, and men thinking, it's okay for them. And the thing is, I think the thing is, it's not vocally expressed that there's something wrong with it. If that's how you grew up as, a young man or a child, seeing your uncle do it or your brother do it, it becomes such a normalized experience that you don't see anything wrong with it, right? But then
Yeah.
it's very uncomfortable when it's being received by women, and it's really
Mm,
hard. And I think I deal with a lot of women who come into sessions struggling with things as, as sensitive as rape or domestic
mm,
violence, or
mm,
abuse at the hands of somebody they know or they don't know, right? And
mm.
the biggest thing is really just the violation, right? That
Yeah.
my personhood, my
Mm,
individuality,
mm,
my sense of self has really been, traumatized to the core, that I can't really make sense of myself without this event that's happened, right?
mm,
So it's those things
mm,
that start to become very sensitive, and they need to be
mm,
handled in sessions with, the care that, they deserve, but really just
mm,
trying to understand that this has happened to you, but, you didn't call for it to happen. You didn't, it's not your fault, because a lot of times, again, women start to internalize things. What did I
mm.
do wrong? Could I have done things differently? But the thing is, you can't be any more hyper vigilant than we are right now, as women in
Yeah.
South Africa. Unfortunately, we can't, because we consistently live like this. And I get, one or two friends or colleagues who travel outside of South Africa, and, they'll do things like taking a walk in the middle of the night with not even something as simple as a catcalling or anything. So there's some kind of feeling of sense of safety, and it almost feels like an out of body experience where you're like, hang on, is this normal? Is this normal that I actually walk out and no one actually even like does anything that makes me feel uncomfortable? Or, those kinds of things, those freedoms. I think
Mm,
a lot of us South African women, unfortunately, we are tied down because you don't even feel safe in the comfort of your home, unfortunately. So it's one of those
yeah.
things. I think we can have a whole conversation about this one.
Definitely, I think, and one of the sensitive ones, the sexual abuse. I think, that one needs a conversation on its own. How people get assaulted. I must also add, for me, I've had experiences where, so for example, um, when I started working, I had met a gentleman, and he had been in jail, right? And he had been in jail, arrested because he sexually violated, he raped someone, right? His girlfriend. And he
Mm,
says, so when he got arrested, they had group therapy in the prison. And they asked him, and the guys asked him, why are you here? He says, no, my girlfriend got me here. Then said, no, man, stop with that nonsense, right? And he kept saying, no, my girlfriend brought me here. They said, no, I mean, she didn't bring you. What did you do, right? And he says,
mm,
it took a while for him to understand that he was there because of the actions that he took. And although it was his girlfriend, he had no right. So I was interested
mm,
in how his mind moved from, my girlfriend brought me here, to, I actually, violated this lady, and I did deserve to have the sentence to. And what, so we were talking about that, and then, what I became aware of is how, like, his whole worldview, it's something he never thought about. He thought, okay, he's my girlfriend, I can do whatever I want. And then if I hit you, because he had also hit her, and she opened the
mm,
case, he assaulted her, physically assaulted her. And then, so if I physically assault you, I mean, you're my girlfriend, you're supposed to forgive me. But it was through, somebody challenging his worldview, that he actually had a different perspective. And
yeah.
there was another, I was on a radio show at some point where a guy called in. So they were talking about, the impact of what happens when, if infidelity, being cheated on. And women would call in and say, this person cheated on me, this is what happened to me. And
Mm,
this gentleman calls in, and he says, for the first time, I never thought that this is how women feel. I thought you cheat on your partner, you say sorry, and then they are fine. And
Mm,
what I do from those two scenarios is that I think part of what men lack is the insight into the consequences of behavior, or the empathy to imagine that what you are doing, this is how this
mm,
thing is impacting people. And that kind of made me hopeful in that then because at the beginning I thought, what are we going to do? But now when I saw these two examples,
mm,
I thought, wow, part of the work has to do with helping men getting in touch with their own emotions and understanding their impact on
yeah,
people. And then that makes me a little bit hopeful. And of course, lastly, I'm concerned about the crime, and I
yeah.
think women, there's a lot of hypervigilance, but I think as a society, I
Mm.
think we are traumatized. I think we need to
Oh,
organize some sort of group therapy for
yeah.
um South Africans, so I don't know. I
Mm.
wanted to then maybe go into the last part. I don't know if you want to say something about this, but otherwise I was going to ask you about just the relationship we have with ourselves. You were talking about the eating. I don't know if you want to comment about this, or I can continue with my next question.
So, are we going into, you were just about to saying the relationship with ourselves? Is that what we're going into now?
Yes, so when we are depressed and stuff,
Yes.
so then we have a relationship with food, because you started explaining how we have this. You broke it into three parts, right? It's in a systemic sense, on a macro level, there are
Yeah.
issues on a micro level. We are talking sort of into work and stuff like that, and then lastly, maybe there are people struggling with themselves. They're struggling to sleep,
Mm.
struggling to eat, low energy levels. So so
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
what are you observing? Maybe to say a little bit more about the way people are struggling within themselves with their own narratives,
Yeah.
um, the stories we tell ourselves, or the lack of words and understanding of what's going on with us.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very like intricate and it becomes very intimate, right? Because we all have a story that we tell, stories that we tell ourselves, right? And part of the work that I do is really just understanding, first of all, what the story is that you know and have come to understand, and the story that you live in, right? So it could be essentially, how you were brought up and, how the world perceives you now, your own self beliefs, where you come from, who you are, where you're trying to go, and all of that kind of stuff, right? It all plays a very like intimate role in self understanding or self awareness, right? So then the conversation for me is a lot of times people sit with these problems where they feel like it's all to do with internal work, and I want to understand my emotions better. I want to understand myself better. I don't know why I think like this. I don't know why I function like this. I don't know why I behave this way. So then it becomes about not just understanding their story, but then also then starting to create alternative stories. Why is it that you believe yourself to be this, and how can we shift from this to where you're wanting to be? So every time somebody walks into my space or into my like sessions, I always ask, where are you and where you're trying to go? Right. Because I think I always put it back to, individuals. You become the expert of your life. If you have issues, you know what those issues are. And if there could be potential solutions, or if you could perceive your life to be different or to look better in a way, what does that better look like for you? Right. So it's about a starting point and the end point. Right. So it's really just about understanding where you are, what's going on. And if you're not able to self-check, because then you do find people who come to you and say, I actually have no idea how to be self-aware. I don't even know what that looks like. Perhaps I've been paying attention to external people, to other people, and feeling other people's cups and not really like self-focusing and coming back into myself. So the work
Yeah,
really starts, from there. Self-awareness, where are we and where we're trying to go. So a lot of
yeah,
times people will struggle with things like, I'm so emotional. I'm hyper teary. For the last 2 weeks, I've really just been in low mood. I've struggled to, even make a plate of food. I've struggled to get out of bed. It's those things where you're like, I know me, and this is not me. So what am I
Mm.
struggling with right now? Right? Why am I so teary? Perhaps an
Yeah.
event triggered it. Perhaps there's a breakup that's happened, or, but sometimes again, it doesn't have to be an event. It doesn't have to,
Mm.
something doesn't have to have happened, right? Just, on a biochemical level, things start to shift hormonally, things start to shift for you as well as an individual. So that's why we start looking at not just therapy or talk therapy. That's when we start engaging, professionals like psychiatrists or maybe even your GP to have a look at you, what's happening internally for you, and perhaps maybe prescribe medication. So that's where we look at, working in multifaceted teams of, professionals, where if I, as a clinical social worker, can, only give talk therapy up until this point, what
Yeah.
else can then pick up from here to aid in your in your like solutions.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful. So where we started to, the things that people are struggling with. You explained it broadly. We're going into details, and then, as you say, you usually ask, where are you and where you're going. So, lastly, where could we go? So, where we are struggling, what kind of solutions could we focus on? What kind of, maybe last, just a few ideas that if you find
Yeah.
yourself um, in a challenging situation, think about these things. If you've got some
Yeah.
thoughts there, yeah,
Yeah, I think the most important thing is once you've done a self check for yourself,
yeah,
I'm struggling with this, or this is wrong, or something's just off. I think the avenues that you start to take are important, right? Lean
yeah,
into initially your support system, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's family, your partner, your social circle, your friend group, or whether it's church as well. Lean
mm,
into your social support, right? That's the beginning. And those relationships tend to be holding spaces for us to be able to really just feel like we're supported and held. And then beyond that, also just then seeking out professional help as well, somebody who's also neutral in your suffering or in your problem focused issues. So you tend to then work with a social worker, work with a psychologist or psychiatrist. Look out for those professional avenues. Sometimes again, because of the affordability of therapy or counseling, people aren't able to afford that, which is absolutely understandable in the climate that we're in. And there are like resources that provide free services like your Lifeline, your SADC, and even your church counselors or your church trained counselors. So look out for the resources that can be able to really just provide you with the support, but also just for yourself, right? For yourself, things like exercise, things like eating better, things like trying to have a healthy sleep routine. Those are the things that you can control for yourself initially. So I always just say the things you can control for yourself and the things that you can, look out for, support and containment. So just use the avenues that you have that are available. Start somewhere. I always say my social media DMs are open, obviously as a self-care, not as a self-care thing, but it's important for me to provide that space where if somebody just doesn't feel contained, reach out, because
mm,
I promise you there are spaces and there is a human being out there who's willing to listen and willing to support. So I really think
mm,
it's you don't need to be struggling alone.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's a beautiful point, to pause it. And because so what particularly touches me about what you say is the importance of relationships, to have a healthy relationship with yourself, but also to make the effort to connect with others, because I think we live in a context where we are pushed to live in isolation, and that's
Yeah.
detrimental to our own health and our own progress. So for me, from what you said, what I would highlight, what I would suggest is that I think as human beings, we are better off with supportive networks, relationally, professionally,
Yeah.
emotionally. I think it just makes life more enjoyable because nobody's an island. And then so the idea that nobody will understand me, I think we have to deal with that one,
Yeah.
that there's somebody somewhere
Yeah.
who will
Yeah.
be able to walk with you and or just listen. But
Yeah. Yeah.
otherwise, any last comment?
Yeah, I think just like catching you on those last few words, I think also just people fear like relationships because they fear vulnerability. And if you just lean into that a little bit more, because vulnerability seems to be looked at as a weak point, and we can have a whole conversation about this as well. But don't let your fear drive you, let your hopes drive you rather. So lean into the relationships that you have and the support that you have. 100% agree.
Um, Beautiful. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for honoring this invite and being generous with your time. I do believe the things that we've discussed, they will help somebody somewhere. And so thank you for tuning in. That is my guest, Sinenhlanhla Nyoni. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thabang, and have a lovely one. Take care.